Hello everybody, this is Tyler Ginter, and we're going to do the first class of Premiere 202, Premiere Pro for the filmmaker. To introduce this class, we need to start out with something that's not necessarily the most exciting thing in the world, but it is extremely important. So we're going to talk about data management and organization today. And to be a good editor, you really need to be a good DIT as well. It's extremely important to kind of master a lot of different workflows. And so, you might be just an editor on a job, but you're going to need to make sure all of your footage is organized, because there's nothing worse than being an unorganized editor. But a lot of people these days are shooting their own content, they're doing DSLR filmmaking or whatnot, and so you need to know how to take that footage you shot on your cars and transform it over to your computer, and then also get that into Premiere in an organized fashion so you can edit and find everything and know where everything's at all times. So we're going to start out with some different tools and websites, and I just want to hit up one more thing on the last note is, you might be working on a project that's a day, or you might be working on a project that's a year long, and so kind of a folder structure I developed from a bunch of friends of mine in the industry really helps me out. So the first thing is hard drives, and you want to make sure you have good hard drives. Now I just want to say up front, there's tons of technology out there. I'm not going to promote one gear over the other. I'm going to talk about what I use in my personal workflow. So everything that I talk about gear-wise or techniques that I use are the way that I work on a daily basis, and that's just the easiest way for me to share my knowledge with editing. So I use these G-Tech drives, and these are the G-RAID. I have 2 4 terabytes on most jobs, and I keep them in a Pelican case. And these are my bread and butter kind of drives to edit on. So I'll have 2 drives. I'll have one as my A drive and another one's my B drive, and I'll edit off my A drive, and every day I'll back up to my B drive. These are just one way to stay redundant, but also it's my kind of workflow drive. There's other solutions out there like Drobos and different things to back stuff up to, but you should have a drive that you can edit on in the field. So there's servers, there's different ways to go around this, but most importantly is have some kind of solution. I do a lot of remote filmmaking, so I need to be able to have a way I can take all this gear from point A to point B. A cost-effective way to do your backup, instead of using like other kind of RAID solutions like a Drobo or different solutions like that, I found is to get something like this Voyager Q. It's basically like a hard drive toaster. And what you buy is these Western Digital or any kind of 2 terabyte drives, and you stick these drives inside of the toaster here. And I have 2 of these. I have, once again, a way to back them up, and these are USB 3 or an eSATA. And so you can get your data off your main drives pretty quickly. So I'll daisy chain all these up, and once I have all my data backed up onto one of my G-RAIDs, I'll go ahead and push it using a program called ChronoSync, and we'll get into what ChronoSync is in a little bit. But I'll go ahead and sync it over, and the difference between ChronoSync and like the Finder is ChronoSync actually lets you synchronize files instead of overwriting them like the Finder does, which is very handy when you're just doing some basic backup procedures to make sure all your data is where it needs to be. And so these being 4 terabyte drives and these being 2 terabyte drives, I'll get as much data as I can on each one, and I'll make 2 versions of this, and I'll actually mail these out when I'm on set or on location filming for a long period of time, or even a couple weeks or a week. I'll go ahead and mail one off to my home in New York City and another one off to another location. And then I'll actually keep these drives permanently in some kind of safe that's waterproof and fireproof. It's, it sounds like it's overkill, but there's nothing, especially when you get into bigger jobs, or even if you shoot some of the best footage you ever had, or you're getting footage from another client, you're an editor, there's nothing worse than losing your footage. So data, that's why I'm talking about this up front, is like the most important thing in my opinion, and then keeping that stuff organized as well. So once you have some of these drives, and these are $80, so compared to spending a couple $100 on one of these, it's great to have these for backup, because you can just run through them and use them almost like a tape-based backup that you have in the past. Obviously more expensive, but it's a great way to have your data stored at all times. Then I have an actual labeling system that I manage all these, kind of like a library, so I know what drives have what content on. And basically I just take screen grabs of the drive, of the Finder and what it's showing. So let me show that real quick. I'll just come into this model shoot that we're about to do. And if this was what I was backing up onto one of the drives, I'll just hit my Apple Shift 4, and that's going to bring up this tool. And I'm just going to take a screen grab of this. And then in Dropbox, I just save these for what's on that drive, and I label accordingly. And so I have a reference wherever I go, what's on my drives. I can quickly pull them up and find which drive it is. And I label those drives: drive 1, drive 2, drive 3, drive 4. And then drive 1 is the on-site drive, and drive 2 is the off-site drive. And so that way I know where my drives are. These are some cases you can put those drives on so you can transport them and store them. And then last thing I'm going to talk about is a program called Total Finder. And Total Finder is an interesting tool because it, for $15, it allows you to have tabs, kind of like in Chrome, where you can have different tabs for your Finder. And it makes backup a lot easier when you're syncing cards and hard drives and things like that. So I'm going to show that workflow as well on what you're going to do when you get your card in and what you're going to do with setting up your hard drive. And then all this transforms once we get into Premiere later on in this class. And once we're in Premiere, I'll show you how to set up all the Premiere settings. So let's talk a little about organizing your folders on your disk. I'm going to come under my hard drive. This is my GTech, and I start up folders. The first one is going to be current projects, and this is going to talk about all the projects I'm currently working on. Once the projects are done, I archive them on one of these Toasters drives, and then I take it off my current projects because I only have enough room for the current projects I'm working on these drives. And I'll save up those. That's why I save these GTechs for the latest and greatest projects I'm working on. So once I have this folder set up, I'll set up my folder structure. And so it always starts with the project name. So the project that we're going to be working on throughout this entire FX PhD course is a model behind the scenes edit that I worked on with my buddy James Douglas Shields. And we kind of all came together and did this kind of collaborative fashion shoot. It was one of his first fashion shoots. And it's going to allow us to work with this footage because we got model releases from all the models, and we all did it for free. So we all just did it to kind of mess around and get some great content and help show what you can do with a project here. So inside of this project, we're going to have our different months, days, and years and projects. So first off, let's just get this up front. I'm going to have my different months inside my project. So if it was only the month I shot on, which this was in April that I shot it, I'm only going to have that month. Which was the fourth month of the year, which is April. So just to understand why I do that, I'm going to make 01 January 11, 02 February 11, and so on. And so down the line, these will all my months will line up for the year. And then once I start a new year, same kind of thing. I'll have everything in line, which makes things very, very easy. Inside of the months that actually have footage shot, I'm going to create, and let me just double check here this was a time lapse that was shot during the model. So this is actually James Studio, so we're going to have the models kind of getting set up here and the lights getting set up and things like that during a time lapse, and we'll process that later. This was on the 23rd, so I want to make another folder in here, and this is the actual day of the month, so 23 April. And so I'm going to drag my assets into that day. So you can see here I have the month that it's going to be all the way down, so those all line up. And then like I said, if it's a different year, I'll start a new section. But I mean, there's not many projects where you go on for several years unless you're working on a feature film. Inside of the month, I'm going to have the actual day of the month. So it looks kind of confusing, but this will be 1 April, 2 April, 3 April, 4 April, all the way down, depending on what days you actually shot footage on. And it's always extremely important to get that footage backed up on the day that you shot it. Then inside of each one of those days, I'm going to have what kind of camera systems I had out there, what kind of audio I had out there. Once again, as an editor, if you get your assets in a different way, or somebody just hands you a drive of random crap to say. I highly recommend you go back and reorganize it up front on your hard drive. There's a lot of people that just have all their assets spread out everywhere, and then that's why their stuff goes off sync and they don't know where it's at or how to sync it back up properly because it's all over the place. So that's why we're going to set this up first and foremost so everybody's on the same page of how we do business here. So under my 5D, I'm going to have card 1 and card B. It could be card 1 or card 2, however you want to set it up. And as these go down, you have card C, card D, and so on down the line. In each one of those cards, that's where you actually put your card. You can also add a separate section here if you're dealing with multiple filmmakers or multiple people collaborating on a project. So you can actually put the names of each person, and then you put the cards inside of each one of those names underneath the camera system. I'm going to have my audio, and this is going to be my audio assets. If I had the red or the F3 or time-lapse or whatever, I'm going to put them outside of here. Time-lapse, I process time-lapse inside of the folder that was shot, and once I'll go through that workflow later, but once it's all in here, I'll keep all the raws and then the final time-lapse inside of this folder so I know how to get back and see it. So I'm going to show real quick how to use Total Finder to get another card in here. This is just a pretend card. Let's say this is my CF card here. And you can see I'm in tabs. I have tabs here in the Finder now. And so this is my CF card. Say this came off the 5D, and I'm putting this into my computer system, and it has a bunch of still frames. Well, I want this to be card C. If I double click here in Total Finder, it's going to bring up my left and my right, and I can see back and forth between the two. And so I'm going to make a new folder here for card C. And I'm going to drag this folder over. And this is pretty quick, but it's normally going to take longer. The most important thing when you're syncing these drives or these folders back and forth is I always double check them. So I'm actually going to select this side on the left, hit Command I, which can bring out my info, hit this on the right, hit Command I, bring out my info, and I'm comparing a few things on here. I'm comparing that these are the same here. I'm comparing that the same number of items, and I'm comparing that I'm actually looking at two separate drives in the right location. Once that's done, I can actually eject this card, which it's a folder now, but normally I would eject that, and I can actually go ahead and format that card at that time. If you can and you have enough cards, I never format my cards until I actually do a chrono sync on that drive. And then let me show you how to do that next. So I'm going to open up chrono sync here, and there's other applications to do this as well. This is just the one that I use. And I'm actually going to drag my folders in from the left to the right. And so I'm going to pretend that this is a test hard drive here, and there's nothing in it right now. It's just a blank folder, but I'm going to pretend it's a test hard drive. And I want to back up my entire project, the James model shoot, from the left over to the test hard drive. This would be my second backup hard drive. This is what you want to do before you go ahead and format that card or any of your other media for the day. Normally I do this at the end of each shoot day, and then I have time to edit normally, which would be an all-nighter. I'll go ahead and do my dailies for the edit for the director or producer or whoever's trying to see what's going on with the project as it's happening. Now, the cool thing here is you can back up, you can synchronize both ways, you can do mirrors. The best thing to do is back up left to right. And you can synchronize deletions. This is useful sometimes, but normally you don't want to do that. And what it's going to do is going to send everything that's from this side over to here in one swoop with, if there's already stuff on here, it's going to synchronize it. It's not going to overwrite anything. So it's a quick way, and let me just show you. I'm going to actually start synchronizing this, and it's going to go through all the media that's actually in my James Model Shoot folder, and it's going to start you can see it already starting to add that folder structure and that content over here and starting to copy all the media. And so instead of wasting your time trying to duplicate whatever folders you think you need back over, this is one quick method to get everything synced and backed up. Once again, I know this is extremely boring stuff. We have to get through it though so we can get on to more of the fun stuff in the edit. But this is extremely valuable information because there's nothing worse than losing a really important shoot of the day. We had Phantom on one of our last shoots, and that stuff was extremely valuable. It's almost $4,000 a day to rent that camera, so you want to make sure you have these workflows set up. And even if you're just the editor and you're not actually the filmmaker out there, you're still going to be held responsible if the stuff shows up missing, especially if they give you DIT rule managements, which just the way the whole industry is going is they're doing less with more, and you have to be a master of all kind of hats. So now that we went through kind of chrono sync, and I'm going to go ahead and abort this. So once again, you can kind of pick these up at any time. It's just going to keep going through there. We're going to get inside of Premiere a little bit here. So I'm going to go ahead and launch Premiere. And I'm running 5.5, and I'll be running 5.5 on the entire course. If you're running CS5, there's some new things that I'll try and point out, but in general, there's a lot of the same things. It's just performance updates and some of the new enhancements, especially in After Effects when we cover the warp stabilizer and other tools like that. So this is the welcome screen in Premiere, and I am going to start a new project. I'm going to call this James. Actually, I'm just going to call it Model BTS Edit. And one thing I wanted to mention is all of this content here that we have under the James model shoot. Let me just kind of clear up some of these other folders so I don't confuse myself, so I don't have anything in there now. Let me get rid of this card C here. Card A and card B, I'm going to select out the assets that are going to help the ones that I'm going to cover. And we're going to actually go through this edit from start to end. I'm going to start handing out these assets in class 3. So in the meantime, we're just going to cover some of the essentials. You can see we have, some different assets in here of the models getting prepared for shoots, and we have interviews, we have time lapse, we have some of the final photos that came off from James' shoot. And it'll be a lot of fun. These are some great people. We all had a lot of fun on set, and I think it'll be a good project to kind of edit up and make a fun edit out of it and a real good story. So just letting everybody know, you won't get these assets until class 3, so hopefully you stick around for the course. But in the meantime, we're going to cover just some basic fundamentals of how to set this up, and you can come back to this project at a later time. It's important to check your location. I always work off the hard drive. I always put everything in these assets. So one thing that we didn't cover under this folder, because we covered the months and the days under each month, and then the assets, the actual camera systems, I always have a projects folder. And inside the projects folder, I make 2 folders, a Premiere folder and an After Effects folder. And so we'll get into more After Effects later, but in my Premiere folder, this is where I save all my actual project files and set up my project. Premiere, wherever you save this project file, it's actually going to save the rest of the assets, the auto save, the preview files, encoded files, and things like that. So I am going to choose that, and don't worry about any of these other things. It's not that critical. As you can see here, it's going to automatically figure out where your assets and things like that are. You can obviously customize it if you want these in different locations, but I always keep same as project. Real quick, one more thing under here. A couple other folders I always set up are final renders. This is where I'll save like actual renders that come out, and that's good for now. There's a couple other drives. Oh yeah, music's another one I'll save out here. And so this doesn't really fall in with a specific date, so I make folders outside, and this is where I put all the audio, like soundtrack music or things like that. Don't get that confused with the actual audio that came off the camera. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this project now, and always just ignore this whole thing here. I wish Adobe kind of got away with this window, because I use Premiere a lot like After Effects, and the cool thing in the new CS 5.5 is you can actually use it a lot like Final Cut. And for any of those Final Cut editors out there, if you just drag your asset into the timeline, it's going to default and ask you if that's what the settings you want. And in the new Premiere, you can do the same thing, and I'll show you how to set that up later. So these are just some basic settings and things. If you want to customize, you can, but I just always cancel out of that. I start with my blank Premiere project. So this will look a little bit different. Next class I'm going to show you how to set up my workspace and why I set it up the way I do and how to save those workspaces. I just try and maximize my screen retell. I am working on this entire course on a MacBook Pro here. This is one of the new quad-core 2.2 gigahertz with 8 gigs of RAM, and it's a 15-inch. So I need to have as much real estate as I possibly can, and that's how I maximize my screen retell and get rid of some of the extra things that I don't find that necessary on a day-to-day basis. So we have everything out here and our Finder organized, and I'm going to show you how to keep that organized when you come into Premiere. Premiere is very user-friendly in the drag and drop kind of way. So now that I have my whole April month already set, I'm just going to drag that whole month right over here into Premiere. And it's going to go ahead and start importing all those files and assets. And so this is extremely handy where everything is pretty much native. So I'm going to be working on these 5D files natively. I'm going to be editing. I'll show you later how to edit red footage natively, the R3Ds. And everything is a lot pretty easy to use when it comes to just dragging things in. So wait for this to finish here for us. We got a lot of assets that are coming in. Okay, so now that all of those files finish coming in, you get this file import failure, which is kind of misleading because it's not really a failure. These are just all the Canon RAW files and all the THM files that came off from the 5D. And so Premiere can't import CR2 files. After Effects can, and we'll talk about that later. So it just comes up with an error, which is okay. We're going to process those later in another class. And here we have our assets. So this is all of the MOVs. One thing I'm going to show real quick is how to use the asterisk key up here in the top left to toggle different windows. So we're just going to take a look over here at our different assets. And there's ways to customize everything you see up here. You can come up here and actually go into metadata display and search for the things that you want to see and what you don't want to see. Obviously the frame rate is extremely important, along with what your audio is recorded at and some of the other information on here. Since all the stuff was shot on that first day, that's fine. Let me go ahead and change this folder around so it matches better. It should be 23 April here. And I'll actually make a new, and I'm going to go through this kind of fast. There's a million different ways you can do everything you see up here. You can come up to File, Import, and import your files that way and actually select your folders. There's tons of ways when it comes to editing, and I'm going to do my best to cover different techniques, but once again, I'm going to show mostly what works for me and what's worked for me in the past the best. Especially when we start talking about keyboard shortcuts and things like that. I've adopted a lot of my keyboard shortcuts from Avid and some things from Final Cut and things I like Premiere natively. So it's not the most standard way of thinking about a lot of different things, because we're kind of merging a lot of technologies together, but it's the fastest for me. And so that's what I'd like to share with everybody as well. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to make a couple bins. And a lot of this is standard editing stuff, but I'm going to make one for 5D and one for audio. And what I'm doing here is obviously mirroring what you saw here under my Finder. And so I want to make sure Premiere looks almost identical to what my Finder shows as best as I can. So I'm just going to select all of my .mov assets and move that to the 5D folder. Oops. Select that and move it in there. Close that folder up, and then select my audio and drag that down into my audio folder. And select both of these and move those into 23 April. So now that we have that set up, our folders are basically organized. I'm going to make a couple more things in here. I'm going to make one called sequences. This is where we're going to put all of our sequences once we start adding them. I'm going to make one called music. Once again, different than audio. One called graphics. One called time-lapse. And these are basic folders I always start with, and then you can always add more from there. But as you get content that comes in, first thing you always do before you try and, because a lot of people make this mistake by just dragging everything into Premiere randomly from wherever they find it. First thing you always want to do is come and find that folder hierarchy you're in, drag it here first, and then drag it into Premiere. So if you have a new music track that you want to use, go ahead and drag that MP3, or I actually always transform to WAV first. Drag that WAV file in here. Then once you have in your Finder in the right drive, under the right hard drive, go ahead and drag it over to here. And the cool thing is, while you're editing, once you back everything up for the day, you can go ahead and use something like ChronoSync once again to go ahead and start mirroring your work in the background while you're editing here. So the next thing I want to show real quick here is how to actually get some stuff down here onto your timeline. And so if we just find a clip, let's see here. So this is one of the girls getting ready. I'm just going to see this little new item button. I'm going to take that MOV that I had and drag it right on top of there. And that's going to automatically match my sequence to whatever I'm at. And so you see we're editing this 5D natively. And so what it's going to do, the first thing is you have to be careful because it's going to hide that sequence it just automatically created. So basically I took that movie file, dragged it to the new item button down here, and then let go, and it created the sequence for me. But like I said, it puts it into that folder. So I'm just going to rename this Model BTS Edit version 1, and that's my sequence. I'm going to drag this into the sequences folder. So now we have our sequence, and then down the line will be version 2, version 3, version 4, and likewise I will save my projects usually every couple days. I'll save it as Model BTS Edit version 2, and I'll just do that real quick. Once again, all I did is save it as into that same folder I've been working in, that projects folder. And that way I have multiple different copies. I'm actually really kind of nitpicky on a lot of different things as well. When it comes to backing up, like I talked about earlier, it's so important to me that I'll actually sync my projects folder to my desktop throughout the time I'm editing. Just in case this hard drive crashes on me, I'll still have the backup, because remember, I just backed up all my assets to another hard drive. But I won't have my project if this hard drive happened to crash. You always want to think, what if the worst case scenario? What if my hard drive crashed right now? What if my computer crashed right now? What am I going to, will I still be able to recover all of my hard work? And when you're working on serious edits and you just spent a day of nonstop editing, you want to make sure you don't have to start from scratch. It would be a nightmare. So once again, I'll use that ChronoSync, and I'll just take my projects folder, drag it on the left, make a new folder on my desktop called projects, drag this one to the right, and I'm going to synchronize those. And that doesn't take long, and I'll do that every basically half an hour or so. I'll just hit this synchronize button again, and it'll go ahead and do all that work for me in the background. You see it didn't take much time at all. And that way I know if my hard drive did crash, I still have a backup of all my media, and I have my projects on my desktop that I can always go back and recover. And so once again, we have our media down here, and we have all of our stuff organized here. That's really all we're going to dive into this week when it comes to editing. One last thing I want to show you guys real quick is under the preferences, some things to set up here. And so Premiere has some pretty customizable things that I like to set up before I get started. Some of your pre-roll and post-roll things, I like to set those to 1 second. That's in trim mode. These are very important. These will actually fluctuate depending on what you want, but the video transition, I normally keep it to 1 second because I normally always work in 24 frames per second. Audio transitions, I'll talk about that in the audio class, why you want to use a 1/4 second for that, but you can set that to longer depending on on the type of cross dissolve you want to do. But I do a lot of things with audio cross dissolves. It really saves time. This is a great handy feature if you want to import a bunch of video or photos and have them, especially photos, and have them really quick. By default, you can do a couple frames, or long you can do up to, however long if you want a 5-second image to come in by default. That's what happens when you drag a photo down. It uses that. These are extremely important little tips here. I like to hide my keyframes. I hate keyframes, and I'll say that over and over again. I guess it came from how I learned how to edit in Avid. I never ever use keyframes for anything, so I hide them. And that way, while you're editing here, I'm just using the plus and minus keys to come in and out. / key sets your space. When I'm coming in and out, I'm not editing and moving things around. I'm not accidentally dragging on those little handles. And let me show you what I mean by default here. Let me just go ahead and turn them on. And the button to turn them on and off is right here if you ever want to know. But you see, you can accidentally completely, while you're dragging and moving things around, like I'm sliding this, I could slide this handle here. So I like to hide them, turn them off. Never have to worry about it. And every new project you create is automatically going to hide those keyframes. That's the main thing. You can change how your bins open here. But that's really the main. One thing to check off that I like to check off is play work area after rendering previews. The render button is the enter key. And once you're done rendering, instead of it automatically playing, it stays in place. There's nothing more annoying than you render a whole work area and you're on a specific section down here on a long project, and all of a sudden it just starts playing your media. So I go ahead and turn that off so it doesn't get in the way. If there's any other questions you have on any of these settings, let me know in the forums. Under appearance, I like to set it to a little bit darker. You can go all the way dark, but I keep it around down here. Better and easier on the eyes after editing long days. And then the most important thing, in my opinion, is autosave. And I can't say how many people I've seen working in Premiere or any editor that don't turn this on. It just blows my mind. I wish Adobe just made it, by default, that it starts saving projects at a much quicker rate. I already set it to 5 minutes. Just think about how fast you edit and how much you would lose if your project crashes. Premiere is very stable, but things happen. The computers are computers, and you're going to crash a project. It doesn't matter what editor you use, something's going to crash. So prepare for the worst. And I keep up to 50 versions, and what that does is you'll see under my projects under autosave, this is where it saves all those versions. So don't freak out if your program crashes and then you open it back up and it's not the latest version. What you actually have to do is come back under here and find the latest autosave. Now these autosaves actually rotate, so once it hits 50, it's going to come back up and overwrite 1. So what you do is you look at the last modified date, and whatever one has the highest time for that day is the one you're going to open up, and then all your assets will be in there like you left them off within that 5-minute window. Those are the main preferences, and that's the main outline for this course. I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to cover next week, which is going to be more of the interface, what all these windows kind of do, and get into some of the tools and things like that, but also keyboard shortcuts. Keyboard shortcuts is the way we're going to start working a lot in this system as we go through this project, just because that's the fastest way. And I'm going to set up some ways that you guys can get better at your keyboard shortcuts and really learn them. But my left hand always stays on the keyboard and my right hand on the mouse, and it's actually on the left hand side of the keyboard. And so that's where everything I do is at while I set in and outs and move things around and kind of cut things up and do things like that. So we're going to get more into that next week. Hope you guys all enjoyed. Ask some questions away in the forum. If I went too fast on the backing up procedures or anything didn't really make sense, please let me know, and I look forward to hearing all your feedback and seeing you guys next week. Thanks.